Hello, I'm Sam Aquilano. Welcome to Business Design School, where we learn to master the art of business design together. Business design is a strategic approach that focuses on the holistic design and organization of a business to create value, solve problems, and meet the needs of customers and stakeholders. And that's what we're here to talk about. We've got a great guest to talk about just that. We have someone who's using business design to nurture and grow new startup ventures that connect deeply with user needs and so that they can achieve scale, sometimes massive scale. So I'm super excited to be joined by Ryan Larcom from High Alpha Innovation. Ryan loves turning bold ideas into reality. I'm told his superpower is complexity busting, which wow, I need that superpower. So he's guiding leaders to make sense of business and industry complexities in order to gain confidence and execute. As a director at High Alpha Innovation, Ryan partners with corporations and universities and builds partnerships to co-design and structure investments in new venture-backable startups to unlock amazing innovation. We're going to hear all about it. The common thread of Ryan's career has been a desire to make the world a better place through thoughtfully designed business models, products, and experiences. Like me, Ryan attended Rochester Institute of Technology for Industrial Design. He also majored in mechanical engineering. So I'm super excited to hear how he went from designing and making physical things to designing businesses. So welcome, Ryan. Thanks so much for being here.
Awesome. Great to be here, Sam.
Yeah, and I always love chatting with you because I feel like we have just enough of a similar background and what we're doing today that you and I can really nerd out on using design in business.
I love going off on the deep end there. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we could. I almost wish we could have recorded when we were caught up the other day because I was just like, this is so good. But no, we're going to do it for real now. So set the stage for us. Tell us about High Alpha Innovation and what you all do.
For sure. High Alpha Innovation partners with large organizations that could be corporations, universities, even municipalities to help them innovate, specifically by launching startups. We believe that startups are really efficient learning engines. And when you're trying to enter a new space, access a new market, create a new technology, they're actually the most efficient way to go about doing those things. So we help them innovate by launching new startups.
Yeah. So why is that the most efficient way? I mean, now I work in a large corporation, so I have my theories, but it's such an interesting model to say, we're going to innovate by launching startups, in partnership. That's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, big companies are really efficient at their core business model. In fact, that's what they've gotten good at over years upon years upon years. They were learning engines once as well. They figured out how do you create a product, how do you bring it to market, and how do you deliver that product really efficiently and effectively. And so they've built a ton of knowledge around that, and they've trained employees to be able to deploy that core strategy. The problem is that when you need to work outside of that core strategy into an adjacency of some sort or another, you're outside of your common knowledge area. And those processes that make you great at executing on the core actually restrict you from learning in those new areas. And so that's why we think startups are really, really good to attack that opportunity.
Yeah, drop a little startup in a massive enterprise and watch the magic happen. Yeah. So would you consider, is High Alpha Innovation an incubator, right? My startup, we were part of an accelerator that was gave us space, a little bit of money, certainly a ton of mentorship, and was about sort of getting us through some of the kind of early stage blocks. You all are taking this, I feel to a whole different level.
Yeah, we classify ourselves as a venture builder, which is actually a brand new category. And you think about accelerators being a time-bound cohort of people who have existing businesses that are trying to get access to customers and investors. The venture studio was the next logical kind of movement on top of that, which is actually bodies, money, and a less time-intensive focus, right, all the way through a major milestone like seed. But in many cases, venture capitalists were doing that for themselves, so to speak. The venture builder takes all of those kind of core processes and knowledge and turns them loose in the context of someone else's business model. So in our case, corporations and universities.
That's cool. Designing actual businesses. I can't wait to get even more into it. But how did you, back to your bio, how did you get to high alpha? Like you were at RIT doing industrial design, mechanical engineering. Like what's your path?
Yeah, great question. So I went to RIT because I wanted to make products that people loved, and mechanical engineers were the only people that I knew that made products. 3 years in, I realized that I was getting the living creativity beat out of me. And I found out about this crazy thing called industrial design, where you design with a user in mind and you end up with these beautiful objects that meet our innate human needs. And so I really wanted to combine those two majors together. Working at a place like an IDEO obviously was right out of the gate something that I was hoping for. I started my career at Honda, actually, which was a real blessing in disguise. At Honda R&D, designers owned the product. And so I got this
Oh,
broad
wow.
cross-functional understanding of customer, market, supply chain, manufacturing, like end to end. In fact, like the first 3 weeks at Honda, I spent on the line assembling the parts
Oh
I
my
would soon
gosh. How
design on the
cool.
cars. Yeah, yeah. And so by carrying it all the way through, you really understand like how difficult is it to design something, because it touches all of these different aspects of
Hmm.
you have to become your own kind of own person R&D. And so
Yeah.
uh, uh, I moved to Indianapolis when I got married to an old college friend, another RIT grad. She was here and loved her job at Cummins. And I took a job at Cummins as well, designing new engines. I had to be like a real
Mm.
engineer during that
Oh
period.
boy.
And the thing that frustrated me most about big companies is they have no idea who their customers are. I remember an experience at Cummins where I was at the factory doing what I did when I was at Honda, right? Like watching a guy assemble my parts. I got back and they were like, "Where were you?" And I was like, "Well, I was on the factory line, you know." And they were like, "Why were you there?" And I was like, "Well, it's my customer, right?" And they were like,
That's it.
"No,
That's what
he's
happens.
not, right?" It's like, how is this possible that you don't understand who your customers are? And
Whew.
D school shipped back in the '90s, and
Yeah,
so I
exactly.
kind of made it my mission in those early days. Like, how do you take human centered design and infuse it into big companies? And
Mm.
got lucky at Cummins. They have a group called Corporate Strategy that takes engineers out of the business, mashes them up with recent grads out of B
Oh,
school, and
cool.
turns them loose in a model that looks like Boston Consulting Group inside of
Gotcha.
Cummins. And so it was there that I really learned how to be a business leader, for lack of a better word. I
Yeah.
did management
Right.
consulting. I learned a lot about the business, and it turns out I don't just love designing products, I love designing businesses. And most of the business leaders I worked with knew how to do this. They could scale existing businesses, right, 2% year over year.
Do, 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 do,
What
do,
I
do, do.
wanted to do was create brand new things, and saw the opportunity to do that a couple times while I was at Cummins. Got a human centered design team set up inside under CTO, which was really, really fun accomplishment.
That's cool.
But High Alpha was getting created right then in Indianapolis. And so it was kind of by luck and chance and timing that I ended up joining the team as one of the early employees. High Alpha is a venture studio. So kind of what I talked about earlier, they
Hmm.
partner with entrepreneurs at inception, co-create an idea, invest in that idea, deploy people against that idea to help that turn into a business that can grow and scale. And I created our early processes, right, for taking ideas and turning them into businesses.
I
So
love it.
that was my big career pivot.
Yeah, what a path. I love that, man. The ups and the downs, back to engineering on the line. But I
Yeah.
mean, in so many of those parts of your career, like you were doing business design, and this is a little bit like what we talked about, like this.
Yeah.
Maybe we didn't call it business design then, but we're definitely calling it now. So how do you define business design, like either in your previous roles or like in what you're doing today?
Yeah, it's a hard word because I think it's still an emerging one in many ways, right? You think about industrial design usually speaks about the creation of a product. When we think about business design, I think about it as the creation of a business. So design is a series of intentional choices, and there's a whole capability set, right, that we've built around that, usually in the context of products or collateral or assets, like graphic design or industrial design.
Hmm.
On the business side, I think about a business model having three parts: feasibility, desirability, viability, or how you create, capture, and deliver value. Uh, design, and visual design typically focuses on just the creation of value, on the value prop
Hmm.
itself. Business design incorporates the revenue model and the resourcing of how you actually deploy that in the context of a profitable entity.
Hmm. Yeah, and those are choices that you can make, and you can
Exactly.
design towards those choices. Yeah, that makes
Yep.
sense. I wanted to ask you because I get this question a lot, especially like I'm still an entrepreneur, even though former
Mhm.
entrepreneur. What is there a difference between entrepreneurship in business design? And if so, like, where do you see it? You're kind of in both. You got a foot in one and a foot in the other.
That's a really good question. I've never thought about it that way before. I think that entrepreneurs practice business design in some ways, right? Because as I said, startups are learning engines. And so you're constantly learning what is your business model along the way.
Mm-hmm.
But there's usually about three big movements I think about from entrepreneurship, right? You're de-risking the tech, you're de-risking the business model, and then you're scaling the business. And so it's that middle one where I tend to focus on business design, which is turning assumptions into knowledge around those three pieces of feasibility, viability, desirability, which usually exists, at least in venture-backed startups, between 0 and Series A or B. Once you start scaling the business, technically you're still designing it, but really all you're doing is creating a growth engine that powers a business model that's already been fixed.
Yeah, turn the crank as hard as you can.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. All right, so the process, right? Let's pretend, I'm a founder of a startup. How are you engaging, and maybe across all of High Alpha? Like, how is that process happening from like idea to partnership with either a corporation or organization? Like, how do you see that?
I'll tell you how we do it at High Alpha Innovation, and then we can apply it to entrepreneurship as well, because the process holds, right, no matter where you start in it. For us, we're partnering with organizations who want to innovate. And so what we're first trying to figure out is the theme. Where do we want to focus this opportunity? Is it far enough adjacent that the core won't accidentally suck it back in? And then is there enough space that you can innovate there and really differentiate from what exists in the market? From there, we get from kind of macro, really tactical. We all grew up on jobs to be done methodology, of which I'm still a huge fan, right? Like Christensen affects a lot of our thought. And what we want to understand is for a given customer or for a given persona, what are their unmet and priority jobs to be done? So we spend a lot of time trying to understand the functional, social, and emotional needs of users in specific circumstances, and then prioritize them based on which ones are valuable and important, unmet, and widely held, so that we can understand jobs that are yet to be satisfied in the world. And so that becomes the core of our business model. And we spend the first 6 weeks just doing that before we move forward on anything. I think the world in general is really bad at framing problems and really great at solving them. We need to make sure we frame the right problem.
That's the foundation, like, to build from, right? Because then from there, it's more of like, what's our unique value proposition? How are we making money? How are we like delivering? Do you use the same sort of like iterative discovery approach to like those elements as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a hypothesis when we ship it right out of the gate. And what we want to do is figure out what are the critical assumptions that sit underneath the hypothesis that this customer has an unsatisfied job to be done. And the danger is everybody tests the hypotheses that they know how to test best first. Instead of the ones that are most critical, right? I'm a designer. I start sketching stuff on paper. My dad's a CFO. He starts, going to Excel to write the revenue model. My friends are engineers. They start figuring out if you can make this thing. But the problem is if you don't do them in the right order, you end up spending a lot of time where it doesn't matter. Really great example of this. One of our friends consulted with a large airline company that was trying to commercialize the Osprey, that vertical takeoff aircraft. The big idea was like, wouldn't it be neat if we demilitarize this? You could now ship large numbers of civilians right from heliports right out. And so they spent millions of dollars on architects to design the experience of going to a heliport. They did the interior design to figure out how many people would fit in this thing. And it was at this point that this individual came in with a consulting company and started looking at it and was like, have you guys talked to any pilots? And it turns out no commercial pilot wants to fly the Osprey because it was made for military pilots in military settings. It's a dog to drive.
It's pretty rough, right?
Yeah, it's really rough. And so as a result, the consumer experience is terrible too. It's loud and you couldn't put enough noise isolation into this thing to make a good consumer experience. And so as a result, like 2 key pieces of the value prop and the revenue model just totally broke really, really quickly. And so we try to go through really rigorously and figure out what can we test, and then what's the lowest fidelity way that we could go about testing those, right? Before you put fingers to keyboard, we're mocking up product in Figma, right? Before we mock up product in Figma, we're hand sketching storyboards. Before hand sketching storyboards, we're describing it with customers. And you want to just make sure that you're testing and iterating at every step along the way.
That's cool. Now, point of clarification, are you then literally like building a startup from scratch, like recruiting individuals that will then like carry that forward? Or are you
Yeah.
recruiting folks from inside the partner organization? Like, is it external, internal mix?
Yeah, great question. This is where business design becomes venture building in my mind, right? So
Yeah,
business
yeah, yeah.
design is shipping the final pitch deck that looks investable, that says, right, these are the series of intentional choices that we believe makes for a profitable, venture backable, scalable business that ought to
Mm-hmm.
exist in the world. But venture building then is snapping together all the other functions to make that work.
Whew.
We've got a recruiting team who finds world-class founders who want to found this. We've got a
Cool.
finance team who figures out how to turn this revenue model into a set of assumptions they can execute against. Legal folks who can figure out a cap table structure that makes this investable from a corporate partner and a venture perspective, and so on. Right? There's
Mm-hmm.
lots of functions to make a functioning
Yeah, oh my
business.
gosh. Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, in our case, we usually go out and find great entrepreneurs from the world. And our specific thesis is that we're launching these companies alongside often large corporations. And so if you're
Mm-hmm.
going to be in relationship with your first company as big enterprise and first investor, you need an experienced entrepreneur who has been through that multiple times to be able to navigate some of those difficulties. It's a huge lever
Yeah,
and also a huge stick. And you want to make sure that you've got
yeah,
experienced folks
absolutely.
involved.
Yeah, that makes sense. It strikes me that you have all these different players, right? What are the challenges that what are the fires you're putting out on a day-to-day basis, like through this process?
Yeah, so many challenges, so many. It's funny. I spent the last 8 years trying to design a like really rigorous method of designing businesses that hopefully leads to more advantaged startups, better portfolio companies out of the gate. And I've got friends who are in venture capital who are like, that we only invest on problem like 25% and on people like 50% at early stage. It's like, oh man, like I've been focusing
Ah.
on the wrong parts, right? uh, what we want to do ultimately is to de-risk the business to the point that we can attract world-class entrepreneurs. Clearly, there's a lot of work
Hmm.
to get to that point, but the business is
Hmm.
going to continue learning. That's not an inflection point when you hire someone that continues to learn all the
Right.
way through Series A plus. And so, what we want to do is attract world-class founders. So, problem number one is how do you get world-class founders to co-found businesses alongside
Totally.
you, and then how do you do it at scale, right? When we
Hmm.
were at High Alpha, we were a fund, right? Every 3 years, we could
Mm.
start 12 companies at a quarterly basis. At High Alpha Innovation, now that we're a venture builder and support multiple different partners, we can theoretically start infinite numbers of companies
Right. Where
because
the needs are.
that wherever the needs are. And so then how do you get founders at scale becomes a really hard question. So that's probably number one. Obviously, we're constantly iterating on the venture building capability set. How do you put together all of those pieces
How do you do
together?
it? Hmm.
And then how do you design really, really awesome businesses as well?
Yeah. Wow. That's so cool. I could also see it as I speak for myself, right? I was a founder who like went through the trenches of startup without a partner, right? And it's like,
Yeah,
wow, so interesting to use that skill set within a bigger ecosystem of like resources and support versus like, kind of doing it alone. Do you find that?
yeah.
Is it a selling point for like entrepreneurs who like have that skill set and like want to practice it without, I'm not gonna say there's no risk in what y'all are doing, but less
Less,
than like
hopefully less.
starting from zero. Yeah, right. That's the idea.
Yep. So yes, absolutely. I mean, it's a lonely job being an entrepreneur, as you well know,
Yep.
and it's a subscale one for most of the company. You hire a designer one who's there to give them credit, right? When you have a portfolio of 40 companies, suddenly there are at least 40 designers that exist now who can now work across the portfolio, 40
Yeah,
finance
that's cool.
people, and so on.
Hmm.
So part of what we do is give them community at various cohorts of stages that can give each other feedback along the way, and ultimately create a flywheel where they're bringing clients to one another, they're bringing talent to one another.
That's great.
Yeah, we need all of those elements to make it really, really successful.
Yeah, that makes sense. I kind of think like part of the work, and you mentioned a little bit like testing ideas, is like building confidence, right? At like it's like maybe you start with pretty low confidence, but by the time you've built this thing, hopefully it's
Mhm.
pretty high. Like what tools, methods do you use to build confidence? Maybe even to break, you mentioned this too, break people's assumptions that they have
Yeah.
going in. How do you do that?
Good question. And what's funny too is it's not like, since we're not sole investors, right? That's a difficult thing too. We can build confidence in ourselves. We actually have to transmit that confidence to our partners who are investing and to
Yeah. You
entrepreneurs who
should be
want to leave their
confident.
jobs and co-found businesses, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
those become more difficult tasks along the way. I think
Mm-hmm.
first is it's an iterative process. You're coming down the funnel, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
part of confidence building is talking to hundreds of potential folks at the top of the funnel, seeing some of those come back again who said, I have a problem, and then we articulate it back to them, and they say, yes, that's the correct articulation of that problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then another set coming back and us saying, what if we solved it this way? And them saying, yes, that's the type of solution, the value props we'd want to see. And then us coming back with a product and saying, what if it looked like this? And them saying yes, right? And then us coming back with a business model and saying, what if we priced it and packaged it like that, right? So like you just bring folks down the funnel, and then your assets, of course, get more and more high fidelity along the way. Right? What starts out as hand sketches ends up in beautiful product walkthroughs and mock-ups and things that you can run user tests on. So I think it's a lot about just the incremental moving from one end to the other. But I think there are a couple like really key inflection points where we look for traction, right? Not just that people say, yes, that's really nice all the way down, but that someone's willing to write a check. That really matters, right? That an entrepreneur who says like, that's a really neat idea is saying, I'll leave my job and start this, right? That a corporation who says this is really neat says, actually, I'll write an investment into this. That's the step function change we're looking for at the end to say that we've been successful enough.
Yeah. It strikes me like when you do that iterative approach, you hear so often like, oh, startups like pivoting. When you're iterating like that, you're constantly pivoting, right? Like you don't have to do a big old pivot to a whole new thing. You're testing and pivoting until you kind of hit that groove.
You got it. Yeah, I mean, the pivots are still big, like you said, at the top, but hopefully by the time you get down to the bottom, right?
Yeah.
Tiny little adjustments, right? If
entrepreneurs are getting closer. Course,
that's right. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love it. How about some real case studies, like companies that you all have built? I'd love to hear like the juice.
Yeah.
Man.
I'll give you a couple. One of our first portfolio companies ended up being one of the early success stories that I just love to tell. We started work with Koch Industries. Koch's got a portfolio of companies, including Georgia Pacific. We worked with one called Molex. They're electronic suppliers. And they were having a hard time understanding which of their electronics components were most likely to be late and shut down their factory as a result of the lags in lead time. Now, this was just pre-pandemic. And when the pandemic took off, of course, this became even more imminent. But we ended up shaking out a company called Amplio that initially went about identifying those risks, so that instead of looking at hundreds of potential parts that could go wrong, procurement leaders could look at the 9 that mattered that week and spend their time really efficiently and effectively making sure that they had been dual sourced or expedited or something like that. We were really lucky to get an employee from the Koch portfolio to run this. He was running a corner of Georgia Pacific supply chain and had been in startups before. So like had this wonderful, like both new startups, but also knew the subject matter expert ahead of him. We paired him with a chief data scientist from a supply chain startup, XYC. So he understood the venture space. They just became this like perfect little combo that we just dropped in and said, start building product. And they created value in 30 days. They were able to find things that procurement officers couldn't get to in months and months. What's funny though, for all the success, right? Like, yay, business design. We really got on something. Molex was ready to be a customer. We're creating value. Is they hit their biggest pivot right after they launched. They realized that the more electronic suppliers that they got online, the more interchangeable those parts were. And so, yes, Molex could expedite, a part on a 747 from China, but it turns out that, one of their other clients had an electronic supplier just across on the other side of Guadalajara that was producing interchangeable electronics components. And so they effectively became a marketplace. They could tell better where parts were and create interchangeability for these suppliers so that you were saving massive amounts of time and money. Instead of trying to solve this on an Excel spreadsheet, they were solving it in the context of a marketplace. So huge pivot that hit right before the hype cycle of VC ended on the far side of 2021, right at the peak of of the pandemic. So they raised a massive
Ah,
round of seed funding from some leading venture capitalists that have just set them up for some really early success and continue
nice.
to go about solving the problem that they were set in place to solve.
Very cool. Oh, I love that. How about another example?
Yeah, I'll go in a different direction for this one. And this
Yeah,
is why I love our work, because you end up in just like dramatically different spaces.
right.
We were working with Elanco. Elanco is an animal pharma company that spun out of Eli Lilly. Uh, they had they have a feed additive that you give to cattle to reduce their methane emissions. And
Mm,
there's big movements in greenhouse gas that folks want to reduce their
yeah.
greenhouse and carbon footprints. They had created this like calculator by which they could show farmers how much greenhouse reduction that they were doing. And they were like, is
Mm,
this thing a thing? How might we go about kind of productizing it and bringing it to market? Now, Elanco kind of sits outside the traditional value chain, if you will, right? They're an actor on the value chain of how you get from cattle to packaged meat, right, on the far side of
delicious
things.
food.
Yes, correct. Amazing, hamburgers and all those sorts of things. But uh, also want to be seen as an industry leader and convener in this. And so the kind of
Hmm.
dual insights there were that everybody has calculators like this. John Deere has a calculator that tells you how much you can reduce emissions from your tractor. So does the fertilizer
Mm,
company that sells to grow the grass for the cows, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so
hmm.
the big idea became a carbon credit marketplace. How might we be able to enable farmers to make sustainable business changes that benefits their supply chain, that reduces greenhouse gas
Hmm.
emissions, and their businesses, because these sustainable changes are profitable for the
Yeah,
farmers.
right.
But often they require upfront capital investment. And so thus a carbon
Hmm.
credit, right? People down
Hmm.
at the bottom of
Hmm.
the supply chain, McDonald's and others who've made sustainability commitments, want to incentivize top of supply chain to go
Right.
about doing work. And so we created Athian. Athian is a carbon credit marketplace specifically for insetting. In this case, dairy is where we began, not
Oh,
beef cattle,
interesting.
so that those sustainability improvements could be yielded across the supply chain. What's interesting about starting a marketplace, of course, is the cold start problem, right? How do you get
Yeah,
both sides to want to
right.
participate in this
Come
thing?
together,
Or
please.
yeah, exactly. Harder yet when Elanco is an outside actor, right, trying to act on this space. And so they did what they
Right.
did best is convene. The
Hmm.
first thing that we did as soon as we had a MVP up and running is Elanco helped Athian go and syndicate their first round of funding to 5 strategics at different areas of the value chain. And so by
Gotcha.
each of these strategics buying in to Athian, literally and metaphorically,
Yeah.
they essentially declared Athian the category winner before the category had even been created. And so
Yeah.
now we've got, they just closed a massive USDA contract. $80 million of carbon
Awesome.
credits will be
Oh, wow.
interchanged across the Athian platform now as a result of this, just in the dairy space alone. And so you've got
Wow.
industry transformation occurring as a result of these two.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, you took it into a different industry and space, but it still feels like it's like this cross, like communication and like connection building that like just bring it back to what you started with, like a single enterprise is going to be like pretty focused on their business, but a startup mentality, if you will, can kind of zoom out and see
Yeah.
opportunities that have just been sitting there but aren't
Yeah.
part of the core business.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's so
sometimes the
cool.
core business needs these startups to exist so that they can be successful, right?
Yeah,
In the Molex example, right, they needed their supply chain to be stable and resilient, and yet Molex is not a supply chain company. It's not their job to solve the totality of their
right.
supply chain, right? And so a startup actually is the best actor to go about addressing that need. Similarly,
Mm,
right, Elanco wanted to convene but could not demand that their value chain
right.
act in a certain way. A startup is a perfect actor to act as a third
Mm.
party and bring people together around a problem that's shared. So,
Oh,
we're
I
always
love that.
targeting opportunities that are strategically important but not core to the business strategy, and that multiple
Mm.
actors will all benefit collectively from, so that right a separate business is the best to go about
Yeah,
addressing that need.
that makes sense. I saw like you also work with like academic institutions. Do you have an
We do,
example
yeah.
of? Yeah.
Yes, it's funny. Somewhere in the middle of our early journey, we were focused solely on the idea of corporate innovation, and we had a university endowment come to us and say something to the effect
Interesting.
of, right, university endowments are asset managers, right? They are exposed to
Yeah.
VC, they invest, and they want returns, and they want early stage exposure as well to diversify their risk profile. They're in big names like Sequoia and Andreessen, hopefully. But what they're also being pulled by their university is to invest in student and professor IP. That's really hard to do
Nice.
for a number of reasons,
Yeah.
right? One is it's super lumpy. You could have a ton of IP disclosure or nothing in a year.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Most of it's not venture backable. And then a lot of it, from a returns perspective, are disincentivized from the university model, meaning universities are great at commercializing devices and molecules, really poor at commercializing software because the skill sets are utterly different. And so the opportunity that they spotted that we've now jumped into is if we were to focus on partnering with students and professors at the idea stage rather than at the solution stage, we could avoid the solutions in search of problem, right?
Right.
Create brand new startups and commercialize them in ways that enable endowments to invest because they're venture backable. They have great entrepreneurial talent at early stages, but they stay aligned to the mission of the university. We literally are creating the proprietary deal flow that every VC says that they have. We're building, right? We're building startups
within
on
the academic institution. That's awesome.
Yes, because otherwise, right? Otherwise, these asset managers don't like the growth they're getting on campus. Start investing in recent alums. Start investing in alums' friends. Start investing in the next thing you know, they're in Series D deals in San Francisco and wondering how does that
it's not connected.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we keep them on
so
mission
cool.
and away from creep. So we just launched a fund with Notre Dame, which we're really proud to announce.
Cool.
First close on $18 million. The fund is focused on the Catholic social teachings that underpin Notre Dame's strategy. And we're already kind of digging into our first sprint, which will focus on breaking the cycles of poverty. So while you have to be relatively humble, there's only so many ways that software startups can act. There are still a ton of low-hanging opportunities that we think that we can make an impact and make for-profit businesses out of that serve all the different actors.
That's the beauty, right? Is you get the sustainability factor, environmental sustainability, but I'm talking like organizationally sustainable.
That's right.
So that there's a model for it to continue. That's awesome, man.
You got it.
That's super exciting. I'll definitely be watching out for the Notre Dame one. That's great.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm curious, this is like a meta question. And you talked about like you're working on like processes, but how do you apply business design to the business of high alpha innovation?
Yeah. That's a really good question. We try and dog food as much as we can of our own process, but it's really hard. I'll tell you, I have gained a ton of empathy for entrepreneurs. I've been, startup adjacent in venture capital before, but like we ourselves are a startup. High alpha innovation grows through revenue and aligned with our partners in that. We actually just had an offsite recently, which is really interesting. Our portfolio management team focuses with founders day one on identifying what their formula is for their business, which is really, really neat. So a revenue formula might look something like price times gross margin equals, dollars, and then dollars minus headcount costs equals profit, right? That's a very basic revenue formula, but it doesn't really tell you a whole lot about the business, right? When you get the formula correct, though, you can realize what the key levers of growing a business are along the way. And so we just dove in and defined our own revenue formula for our business that helps us to understand, like, how do we price and package? How important is our team as a result of the fact that we're a people business? How do we think about what good enough and good look like from a startup perspective? What should equity look like in the context of our ownership position? And then how do we advantage those startups? And so when you kind of put together the whole formula, you're like, oh, those are the 5 levers I ought to be acting on in my business. What experiments should we put underneath those levers that we can continue to go about unlocking new growth opportunities from?
I love that. Isn't there's power just also just in seeing it, right? Like, of course, the process of like getting to it, iterating, like refining it, and then like having that formula. I assume it's on a slide somewhere where you're like, look at that. It's something so complex, but now I can actually like wrap my mind around it. And then just like you said, make decisions on like where I put my time and energy to like affect it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's design too, right?
It is. It is. And it's really hard to zoom out, right? It takes forcing functions to say, I'm going to stop working in the business. I'm going to work on the business right now. And that'll help drive the way that we're doing work in the business again for the next quarter.
Oh, I love it. Curious, going back to like hard business design, like what tools and frameworks are you using? And then like what artifacts are you actually generating beyond, classic deck, but like sometimes I get curious, like what people are actually like making that like manifests
Yeah,
thinking.
cool.
Yeah.
Well, the process I want to talk about actually is Sprint Week here, and we can crack into the assets that sit underneath
Yeah.
that. One of the things we realized when we were at High Alpha is that all businesses have momentum inside of them that needs to be broken with forcing functions. So funny enough, right? High Alpha as a fund has to start 12 businesses in 3 years. And yet after we launched business number 1, it was easier to support the operations of business 1 than it was to start business 2. And we said, shoot, we need a forcing function. Otherwise we're never going to yield for our investors what we want to do. And so Sprint Week was born out of that, and it has continued to iterate for the last almost decade since then. For us at High Alpha Innovation, Sprint Week is about taking a really well-framed problem and then designing the product and then business model that go around that so that we yield an investable pitch deck on the far side. And I think more than anything else is the forcing function that we use to get decisions made. So it's a 3-day intensive that we kind of deep dive into. And then on the 4th day, we pitch these decks with the ideal that on the 5th day, we're actually deciding which of these businesses that we've pitched goes forward. And awesome. Success is multifold, right? Getting to the far side of Sprint Week and saying, this is an investable concept is success. Getting to the far side of Sprint Week and saying, we've explored this concept as far as it can go, and you saw the pitch, and that is not an investable concept, is success. It was 12 weeks of that versus 2 years and $20 million of bad decision making, right? Is way better to stop.
I'm picturing the Osprey where we're waiting, we're on the helipad, and we're like, this is terrible. Millions of dollars has been spent. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And how often do large corporations, for momentum and kind of, like you said, poor prioritization of jobs to be done, accidentally do just that, plow ahead on things. So I think the forcing function itself is probably the most important part of what we do.
Yeah.
The assets that come out of Sprint Week look very, very much like you'd expect in just about any pre-seed pitch deck, right? We're looking for a really good understanding of who our customer is. We've spoken to, at that point, dozens of folks inside of our ideal customer profile. So there's something that looks like a persona, right? We have a really good understanding of what the job to be done is and why that is a priority to them. That usually gets told in a really compelling story that includes kind of a why now for that problem. Why is this moment the moment that customer jobs have become reprioritized in some way or another? What's the secret by which this business knows something else about the world that other people have overlooked? Then we end up in a product. We really, really like to tell the future state in visuals. I think folks tend to underestimate the power of visual design as well inside large organizations, right? Ugly PowerPoint decks with bullet points tend to do it. You can't tell
the real thing.
Stories. Yeah. So we show the product, we show the faces of the people using the product, and we step through click by click, not as the full movie, but as the sizzler reel for the movie, if that makes sense, illustrating the key value props along the way. And then we talk about the economic model, right? I think it's easy to do order of magnitude pricing on a slide. We have this kind of quirk that we call the Nautilus, which, if you think about the way the shell expands on itself, we're asking ourselves questions of how does this business get to 100K in recurring revenue, $1 million, 10 million, and $100 million.
Cool.
And some people call that a reverse P&L. But what it forces you to say is, okay, if I have 100K with only 2 customers, that's 50K a customer. Great. Who are those 2 customers? Back to personas. How do we access them? Who buys? How efficient is that going to be? And then 50K, wow, that's a lot of money in recurring revenue for a product, right? How long will the sales cycle be on that? What does the quality of the product need to do in order to yield 50K in recurring revenue? And so that sets your product roadmap. And then, of course, your product roadmap sets your team capabilities. And then your team capabilities set your investment needs. And so even basic crayon math like that, it's so funny. You can get so many design decisions.
Sometimes all it takes, right?
Yep. 22 customers at 50K versus 20 customers at 5K. Utterly different sets of decisions that you can make.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you get, so I love Sprint Week. That's so, because otherwise no one moves.
Got it.
When do you get to like testing, sort of like, call it, I've been thinking this whole idea of like minimum viable business, like where you actually like take some of those formulas and, visuals that were on slides and actually like test them in market or simulate in market?
Yeah. So this is a question we ask ourselves regularly, actually, which is what's the cutoff between what we do that yields enough conviction to start a company, and then what should the company do? And so in our case, we're asking questions like, our pre-seed check is $1 million, right? What are we confident enough that we ought to launch $1 million experiment to continue to learn more? And so minimum viable business in a sprint week deck actually ought to exist. Like we ought to have a really strong hypothesis of what that looks like, right? Meaning, who are your key team members out of the gate? How much are you going to charge for that product? How could you actually create an MVP, which is usually a lot smaller as a product than that, 50K,
Absolutely.
whatever, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes
right. That's why I also love that math, because you're like, you know what? We're not going to get to 50K times 2. It's going to have to be something more realistic.
Totally. Yeah. What does the day one product look like, right?
Right.
And when we feel like we've got a real clear first 90-day plan for a team around a product that's validated enough by customers, because we've been testing that all the way through, right? Users testing products, customers testing pricing. We say, let's start the business. And so in some ways, we're giving the business those entering hypotheses and allowing CEOs to say, this is the way that I would go about testing these hypotheses efficiently and effectively. And that becomes the first year of the startup, right? Which is figuring out, can you build that minimum viable business, and what do you learn along the way? Which
I'm assuming they pivot and iterate even from there too, right? But they are, to your point, the bird has left the nest, but they are cradled as they
That's
are,
right.
they are flying on their own.
And we stay really close to them over that whole first year,
and
all the way
until question. Okay.
Right? We have a team that we call Accelerate over here, who sits next to our CEO intimately, right? The talent team helps to recruit. Our go-to-market team helps them to think about how you produce the assets, test the user profiles, get in relationship with potential customers, do founder-led sales. And our implementation team is asking questions, that most folks tend to overlook. When you're in a relationship with a big company, how long does it take to get through your procurement cycle? What are the cybersecurity insurance levels that are required? Right, the more that we can de-risk, so that we can just rapidly get in a relationship with this business that has told us that they want to be a customer, the better off we can set up our founders for advantage.
Oh, that's so cool! I love that. What a cool model. Last question I'll ask, you're playing in such interesting spaces. There's probably a lot of founders watching this, a lot of designers for sure. What's your advice for people designing businesses, either internally, as we're talking, within a big organization, or your classic entrepreneur who is making decisions? What would you share to kind of keep them going and to be successful?
Different words of advice probably for different people. So for entrepreneurs, I think the number one thing is, be in market and learn, build in public, learn alongside customers. It's totally critical to ship before you're ready and test your hypotheses, especially the hypotheses that you're most scared of. And what that requires is forcing functions, that you stop working in the business and start working on the business at a regular pace, which I say with a high degree of empathy, right? Being in a startup ourselves, it is hard to prioritize that type of work, right? But watching portfolio company CEOs of ours who've run multiple businesses, it's like watching a marathon runner. They've got no fat on them at all. The only thing these folks are focused on is rigorously attend the 3 assumptions that actually matter. They could be doing so many other different things with their time and effort, and yet they just keep saying no. It's this one thing on product. It's this one thing on go-to-market. It's this one thing on team, and I am just going to build. And on the other side of that, we're going to find what we need to find. And that ruthless focus has gotten Amplio where it got, right? Athian where it got. So for entrepreneurs, build in public and work on the business as much as you can. For folks inside big corporations, we probably could spend an entire time on the difference between
That's right. That's the second episode.
Episode number 2. But as the teaser for episode number 2, I think that the idea of these business design skills, of product management, of human-centered design, are still very radical inside big corporations. And I spent a lot of my time inside big cos. Folks are not used to emergent strategy. They're used to deliberate strategy. We're going here, we're going to get there from here to there. And in most of these spaces, we actually don't know what we don't know. And deploying tools like this really, really effectively allows you to ship case studies of success in really, really small ways that gets you the permission to be able to go do bigger things. And
Right.
I think actually differentiate in many ways from your peers. You're not walking into the CFO and saying, I need $2 million. You are saying to your direct boss, I need 20K to launch these 3 experiments. And I'll be back on the other side with data of what we do next as a result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The small wins lead to big wins, right?
You got it. Compounding effects over time.
Absolutely. And I lied. I have one more question, which is how can folks learn more about High Alpha Innovation?
For sure. High Alpha Innovation is highalphainno.com, INNO, on our website. Our portfolio companies are all there and continuing to grow and scale, always looking for amazing talent in the portfolio. And then you can follow along on Twitter, now X, and Instagram and LinkedIn as well.
Love it. And you guys produce great events, content. Highly recommend everyone check out High Alpha Innovation. Some really cool stuff.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, in October every year we do our Alloy Summit, where we bring together VCs, startups, and innovative organizations who want to work together. Alloy, right, which mixes metals together to create something stronger. We want to mix those players together to create something stronger in the world too. Yeah,
I do want to attend one of these days, maybe next year. So
it'd be great to have you out.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I loved it. I knew I was going to love it. Hope everyone enjoyed this. Folks, for more great ideas and content about business design, check out all our articles and videos at businessdesignschool.org. And one more thanks to Ryan for joining us. Really appreciate it. And we'll see everyone soon.